Let's get into the 78 project right away. Herb and I, we have a lot of passionate feelings. We ended that show pretty heated, pretty tough. You were ready for the White Sox to move to Nashville. I was adamantly against that. How do you feel right now? You ready for them to move to Nashville still?
Any second.
Okay.
Like, bye. Don't threaten me with a good time.
You will lose your job. We're not NSHV.
I'll find another one.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go to Greg Hinz. He has.
I love this job, but if they lose, I'll find another one.
He's had his job at Crain's Chicago business since 1996. So this is a man with a ton of resources, a ton of connections, and he started to tell me, at least with this interview. And you could check out Greg's interview. You could follow him at Greg Hinz on Twitter, and then you can check out the actual article over at chicagobusiness.com where the exclusive interview is published. You will have to pay for that exclusive, but it's a outlet that's well worth it.
Support journalism, local journalism especially.
And Greg Hinz started off telling me why Jerry Reinsdorf is starting these seismic moves right now.
The team isn't very happy at Guaranteed Rate Field. Haven't been happy for a long time for a variety of reasons that we can go into. And their lease expires now 4 or 5 years down the road, which means if you're going to consider serious options, now's the time to do it because you can't build a stadium in 10 minutes. I think another thing on his mind is frankly his own mortality, which he's kind of laid on the table when I had lunch with him. He said, "Hey, I'm going to be 88 in a few days. I'm not going to be here forever." He didn't say it, but I think the death of his running buddy and partner, Rocky Wirtz, who owned the Blackhawks, has to weigh heavily on him. And I'll take him at his word. He says, "Hey, if the team, if I'm dead, the team is probably going to be sold by my heirs and the other investors after I go, and it probably won't stay in Chicago. And therefore, if you want to keep it in Chicago, we kind of have to make it more valuable and more presentable and tie it down legally. And the best way to do that is a new stadium that the taxpayers would pay for with a long-term lease."
Right. So I think most people are trying to understand that long-term lease and how maybe the Bears figure out first. What did you sense the current relationship between the Bears and White Sox being? Is it an active relationship that these two are at least communicating? I know Jerry didn't want to elaborate too much.
I think the relationship at the moment is they're competing for the same pot of money. There's this little agency called the Illinois Sports Facilities Authority that nobody's ever heard of, but it's the agency that built Guaranteed Rate 30 years ago or so, and which renovated Soldier Field for the Bears. And their source of income, for the most part, is revenues from a hotel tax on Chicago hotels that yield $65 million a year. Both teams are eyeing that, and I'm not sure there's enough money to go around for one of them, much less both of them. So they started talking, and I suspect what they're talking about is, well, how can we make the pot bigger, maybe get some other revenues or whatever, but they don't want to be – they're in a position if they all get together and present a united plan and go down to Springfield and City Hall, they might get somewhere, but if they look like they're fighting, they'll probably kill each other.
Right, and they probably need both Brandon Johnson and JB Pritzker on their side. I know Brandon Johnson just had comments recently about giving sports teams public money, and I know JB Pritzker, at least recently, has been somewhat against it, but has said as long as there's a viable plan to create revenue, he might be for it. If you had to give a temperature from, we'll go Celsius, even though we're in a Fahrenheit country, 0 to 100, where would you put the temperature of the likelihood of them securing that public subsidy? I
think the likelihood that they're going to try is pretty high. Whether they get it or not, it's a little too early to tell. There's no credible argument that the Bears are going to leave the metropolitan Chicago area and move out of state. That just ain't going to happen. So the question then is, what's the value to the city of Chicago of having them in town and playing at Soldier Field or somewhere around Soldier Field? In this case, they're looking at the parking lots just to the south, as opposed to out in Arlington Heights. The teams seem to be all gung-ho about Arlington Heights. They've changed, perhaps because they've had a change in management with Kevin Warren coming in as team president. As for the White Sox, they haven't presented a very good team on the field. They're not Their popularity could be a lot better than it is. They have a hard case to make, but uh, the question ultimately will boil down to the politicians want to be blamed for you let the Lighthouse, the White Sox leave, or you let the Bears leave, and if not, are they willing to come up with the political support for taxes that won't be very popular? Now, I would add that the plan is described by Reinsdorf doesn't involve any new taxes. The taxes that already exist. The hotel tax is there, and it ain't disappearing, however much the hotel guys would like it to. And the sales tax that he's talking about is a stopgap. That's already there too. So at the moment, they can say, "Hey, we just want to redirect existing money. We don't want new taxes, but it's clearly going into their pockets."
But extending that bond for 30 to 35 years, right? So keep the existing taxes, but just extend its life for them to make up for that money.
Renew it and extend it, because
Okay.
you can get, if you have for 30 years to pay it off, you can get it's like your house. You owe $20,000 now, but and the note is due in 5 years. But if you want $100,000 for this and 200,000 for that, well, you get a $500,000 mortgage and you pay it over 30 years. It makes it much easier.
Right. And then you talk about Jerry and the product on the field. He mentioned that, public money would be good for the team. You see in 2021 after COVID, 19,000 fans per game, and they won the division. Then the next year, nearly 25,000 people per game. It seemed like the stadium was fine. It seemed like people were coming to the stadium because the product on the field was good. But then obviously the product started to take a turn. Like I'm trying to really make a sense of his tone when he's talking about the product on the field is dependent on the stadium and the place where they're playing baseball.
I hear you. First, let me stipulate that having a good product is always important. This is showbiz. This is entertainment. People don't want to go see a team that's going to roll over and be out of it by the bottom of the third. So, and to the extent he hasn't been able to put that together, that's on his plate. It's his fault, and he needs to do something about it. And they've tried, but it just hasn't worked. To another degree, though, sports fans, and you see this all over the country, are looking for a little bit more now. If you view a ballpark as part of an entertainment area where there's restaurants and bars and nightlife and other things around it. Look at what the Ricketts have done up around Wrigley Field. And they've paid for all the renovations of the field themselves, but they've also put a lot of money into surrounding stuff. People feel safer if you're in a crowd. They can stick around for 3 or 4 hours afterwards and, not be worried they're going to get shot up. If you go down to guaranteed rate field on a day when they're not playing, you can shoot a cannon through there. There's nobody there. There's no neighborhood there. It's just a sea of empty parking lots. Now, he's the one who built it that way 30 years ago. It's maybe his fault. But he says that looking at Camden Yards and looking at Minnesota and looking at Denver and other places that have built new stadiums, we need to have a different paradigm here. And he says that only that new paradigm is going to give him the kind of income that he needs to go out and really compete for top free agents, which is half the game in baseball these days. You know more about it than I do, but if you can't compete for the best players, you ain't going to win.
They're trying. They're not trying to sign, those best players, but they're trying to maybe create them as best as they can. With Related Midwest in this property, the 78, is it alluring enough? Is it the most alluring spot that will gain that public money for Jerry? Do you feel like they had the most successful bid that Jerry could then sell to, the governor and mayor on why they need public money for this specific spot?
I think the 78 site is a good site. It's just south of the Loop. It's at Roosevelt and Clark Street. If you look south, it's essentially never been developed. There were some warehouses and rail yards there that were pretty much torn out 50, 60 years ago, but it's pretty close to raw land right in the middle of the city. It's close to the expressways. The Ryan is just there. The Kennedy's there. It's not too far from Lakeshore Drive. There's a metro stop. They're talking about putting a CTA L stop or subway stop there. And it's close to hotels. It's close to a lot of restaurants and other kinds of nightlife stuff that already is in Chicago. So yeah, I don't know if there's, I suppose you could argue there's a better site somewhere, but this one is pretty good. It has a lot of potential if it's developed the right way.
So if this doesn't go right, they don't get this public support. Do you think there's a compromise on Jerry's price tag? Do you think there's going to have to be some compromise, especially as you mentioned, the Bears and the Sox are fighting for that same pot? When he comes out with this certain price tag, how much do you think he's willing to give if, maybe the end goal is just to get any public money at all?
Jerry Reinsdorf has, for good reason, a reputation of being a shrewd bargainer who knows how to get the maximum stuff from whoever's the other side of the table. I have to assume this is a bargaining position that they're willing to bargain. I've yet to see him put a bunch of his money on the table, but he's got a lot of money to do it. The fact of the matter is, although he says they're going to invest in other parts of the 78 development, the stadium itself will be built strictly by taxpayers. I'm not sure that's saleable in this political environment. How about bellying up to the bar, Jerry, and putting $200 or $300 million bucks of your own money in there?
Why not, Jerry? Why not pony up and pay a little bit? Thank you, Greg Hinz, for his time. At Greg Hinz is where you can follow him over on Twitter. And again, you could read that exclusive interview at chicagobusiness.com. Thank you again to Greg Hinz of Crain Chicago Business for joining us. Herb, what'd you make of the 10 minutes with Greg? What did you make of the article now that we've had time to digest and read it? What do you think of the 78 project?
I'm a fan of Jerry doing what he usually does. While I, as a fan of the White Sox, don't like him trying to get this money from us, the taxpayers, I understand why he's doing it. As Greg said there, he's a shrewd businessman. I think he came up as a real estate lawyer. He knows what he wants to do. He's done this before, where the current ballpark is 33 years old. He got that stadium from pretty much blackballing and blackmailing the state of Illinois and his friend Big Jim Thompson. No more Big Jim Thompson anymore. And as Greg said at the end, I don't know if the political and the social hunger for paying for a billionaire's stadium is out there like it was back then. And the threat of moving, as I said before, when he's like, would you want them to go to Nashville? I was like, yes. If that's what they want to do, I'm not going to sit here and beg him to stay. And definitely not going to have him take the money that could be used in other places. And I'm not going to be one of those people who get on here and get on my soapbox and say, well, they could be using it for schools. Well, they could be using for this, that, and the other. Because I don't usually do that. So I won't start it and just bring up an argument just to oppose Jerry. But that money can be used in other ways. And if Jerry really wants to have his legacy and really, really wants to have White Sox fans secure that this team's going to stay in Chicago, put some of your own money down. Most of your money down. I'm sure White Sox fans would be like, hey, man, we'll meet you, or Chicagoans, we'll meet you at a 70-30 split. You pay 70% of the ballpark, we'll pay 30. It would not be fine with me, but at least that's something. You're at least giving of yourself, who's listed as a $2.4 billionaire, to build your own stadium and to have your legacy as such. Right now, he's doing nothing but alienating fans like us, and then also bringing up cities like Nashville as if that threat is going to be credible to us, and like we care that he's going to move to Nashville or the new owners.
Well, but that's the thing, is like he's not like
the new owners.
I'm really getting the sense that it's Jerry Reinsdorf's final move is either he's getting a new stadium or he's not. And if they don't get a new stadium, he's just saying that, and as Greg said, there's no legality keeping the White Sox here. So if they build a new stadium, you'll be able to extend the life of the White Sox for sure, for certainty, give you that peace.
And the thing is, he can do that easily with his money or go and get a loan and passing that on to the new owners. And if the new owners come into Chicago and say, no, F that world-class city, 7-time Condé Nast best big city in America, let's move to Nashville or Salt Lake City or Portland, Oregon. Are we listening to those cities as opposed to Chicago? Are we listening? Like Chicago, you guys live in this city. You understand how great the city is. I don't care who comes in. If that person is from Nashville, if that person's from Portland or Salt Lake City, they get to Chicago and be like, why would I leave this great metropolis for question marks that are going to not be the solution to my answers?
Well, and I think it's Mutajaba Ali. I don't
Look at you.
I don't know if I've said that correctly.
Boom.
I don't know. My eyes hurt. Will incentives based or performances be good options? Meaning instead of giving them all the money up front, it should be based on a discount for fans. I don't think that's a bad idea. But I do find it funny because I was doing some research to talk to Greg Hinz, so I didn't feel stupid. And there was a piece in NBC 5 from 2010, and it was talking about the Cubs getting denied the $200 million for Wrigley Field, and how Greg said, the Ricketts themselves ponied up that money, built out that entire stadium. But in 2010, they were like, why don't they get the money once they win a World Series? 6 years later, after they made all the renovations, they did. So, I mean, hey, spending the money and making the commitment to Chicago was not a bad investment from the Cubs. So maybe the Sox would learn something from that. Brandon Johnson, mayor of Chicago, said yesterday, as far as financing these projects, both organizations know that they have to put some skin in the game. They're expressing a commitment to do that. As far as public dollars, we haven't gotten into any of those specifics yet, but I will say that we're going to explore all options, but we have to make sure that we're doing right by the people of Chicago. Everything is on the table, but again, I want to make sure there is a real commitment to public use and public benefit. So I have no idea what is going to happen.
Word salad. Yeah, but a big word salad there. He wants to be as vague as possible, just so he can have some negotiation tactics when Jerry comes to him with hat in hand and begging for money. I hope Brandon Johnson, people already don't like Brandon Johnson. This is political suicide. You give public money to a billionaire. Any of these legislators who do this, everybody's going to remember at the polls. So tread lightly. People are not willing to be doing this, especially for such a detestable owner like Jerry Reinsdorf.
And Shy Bros Football saying, do not go to Sox games. We're going to take a break after this. Force him to sell. He's selling. He's about to turn 88 in 3 days, and that's the whole point of the Greg Hinz interview. What he's expressing is his mortality is, he's very aware of his mortality. He's aware that, not a lot of people live past 78, let alone make it to 88. So, it doesn't mean that Jerry Reinsdorf is going to be passing soon. We know Virginia McCaskey has lasted all the way to 100 and is still going. Like, it's not a guarantee that Jerry Reinsdorf would die in the next 5 years, but if I had to bet, I would absolutely think that the White Sox have new owners within the next 5 years because, again, that article says they're shovel ready. They want to start building this year. So, I don't know if that's going to happen, but also, if they are building a new stadium, they're approaching a new home. That's when people will be interested in buying the team. And, again, he's approaching just older and older and older. He's not getting younger.
Yeah, he could go the Mike Ilitch way where the Tigers owner said, I'm going to die soon, and I'm going to push all my chips in. Mm-hmm. It didn't work out necessarily. They didn't win any championships, but I guarantee you go to Detroit, bring up the name Mike Ilitch, everybody's like, what a great owner. When Jerry does pass, he will have a bad reputation here, and his legacy will be terrible from us White Sox fans, from people like Matt Peck and the Bulls fans. His name will be tarnished here. I would think if you see your mortality, you would want to leave something for the fans that you're supposed to be serving.
We all silly like the mayor.